I am now on season 2. Me and Sarah moved on from season 1. Now we're on season 2. We're actually a little bit ahead. I'm trying to catch up with these episodes here. And like I mentioned before in my last video, I'm really going to dive more into some of the creative aspects behind each episode, the directors, writers. I want to talk a little bit about that. So the first episode we got here is episode 201, The Desperate Kingdom of Love. Now, this was originally aired on September 21st, 2004. It was directed by Greg Prange and written by Mark Schwann. Now, obviously, Mark Schwann is the creator of the show, so when you have any big episode, pretty much any big episode like the finale or game-changing moments, mid-season finales, usually Mark is going to be the one who wrote those episodes. And this was the kickstart of the season, so obviously he wrote that. And Greg Prange directed it. Now, Greg, overall, the course of the show, he directed 31 episodes, starting with season 1 all the way to season 9. He actually directed 3 episodes in season 1. The first episode he ever directed was the 9th episode of season 1, which was a good episode. If you go back to it, that's the episode where Nathan takes drugs, collapses on the court. We have a scene with him and Dan in the hospital. It's kind of a game-changing moment in the show. He directed that episode. He directed episode 14 of season 1 and the season 1 finale, which is one of the best episodes of season 1. Prange went on to produce the show as well. If you look back, he also had involvement with Dawson's Creek, worked with Chad Michael Murray on that. I did meet Greg. I think I personally met him once. It was during the filming of the season 7 finale. He was a pretty nice guy. The first time I ever saw him in person, I went to a Q&A for the Cucularis Film Festival where it was Greg and Paul Johansson and Chad Michael Murray, and got to listen to them all three talk about the making of the show, and as well as other things. So he's a pretty interesting guy. The first episode of season 2 is pretty good. Not the best season opener if you look at all the season openers in the course of the series, but not the worst either. Picks up where the last episode, the season 1 finale, left off. And this episode starts with a dream sequence, sort of, for Deb having where Dan is dead. It was a pretty good opener for this season, for that one shot. And throughout the course of this episode, Deb is dealing with a lot of guilt, because not only what she did with Keith in the last episode, but also the fact that she waited around before she called an ambulance for Dan. She kind of messed with him at first because he threatened her as he was laying on the floor, what have you. This guilt that she experiences in this episode is, I feel like, just the beginning of everything that she's going to feel through the course of the series, because the action that her and Keith made in the last episode really starts the domino effect of things that are going to come throughout the rest of especially the high school years, but then, the repercussions throughout the rest of the series. So yeah, like the guilt that she feels in this episode, I think is definitely deserved. But some other little thoughts about this episode. You got Keith and Lucas, they're off in Charleston, but then they have to weigh the pros and cons of whether or not they should go back to Tree Hill, whether or not they should let this experience with what's happened to Dan make them come back, or, should they just continue this life that they moved there for? Which, overall, it's kind of ridiculous because they made this huge thing in season 1 about them leaving, right? Which we knew that, Lucas was not going to stay gone, right? He's the main character of the series. At least in season 1, he's the main character. And I would say for a while, Lucas is the main character. So we knew that he wasn't going to leave. So we knew he was going to end up making the decision to come back, but literally one episode and they're back. Some other little things, we have Huey Lewis plays Haley's dad in this episode. He only appears in 2 episodes in the series, this episode and the next episode. Um, Obviously, her mom comes back for a couple more episodes, but this is the last time in season 2, the first and last time that we see her dad, who is Jimmy James. I hope that was supposed to be an intentional joke. I liked Haley's parents. It was nice seeing them, and nice seeing someone's parents on the show not weighed down with so much baggage, or mean, or whatever have you. Even we see down the line Brooke's parents, and they definitely go fit in with that whole baggage and whatnot that they put on their kids, were either Dan and Deb, and even Karen to an extent. So overall, a good introduction to the season, but I don't think it's one of the best episodes of season 2. I definitely think the season picks up and gets better as we move along, but it was a good transition between season 1 and season 2. Then we move on to episode 2, Truth Doesn't Make a Noise. This episode aired on September 28th, 2004. It was directed by Billy Dixon, who also directed the 18th episode in season 1, which was the Boy Toy episode. He went on to continue to direct episodes throughout the first 3 seasons. He was a director that kept bringing back. He did a pretty good job. I feel like I can see why they kept bringing him back. The episode was written by Mark B. Berry, who wrote a total of 4 episodes. This was his second episode he wrote. The first episode was 104, Crash Into You, which was a really good episode in season 1. I don't think this episode is quite as good as that, but, it's not like it's not like a lot of times when you bring these writers in, they do shape the episode. Obviously, as the writer, they heavily shape the episode, but they're also, for the most part, I feel like given a story to write, and then it's how they present that story, right? So, the things that happened in episode 2, I don't necessarily think was his decision. I mean, that was, the writer's room. It was Mark Schwann, the creator of the show. Overall, I feel like most of the things that happened in the series, at least direction-wise, was probably Mark's decision, good or bad. So episode 2, I like at this point in the series, you start to see, Dan's taking a different step in his direction in his life, right? He's in the hospital, he's dealing with his decisions he's made, he's trying to actually get into Lucas's life. This starts to play into an effect in this season, and we'll see more of that moving forward, how that affects Lucas, Dan, Nathan. But you also see a different side of Deb. You started seeing it in the last episode, you can continue seeing it in this episode. She's not the great Mother of the Year that she, they tried to, not necessarily Mother of the Year, but they try to make her this really likable character in season 1. They're like, oh, well, this opposite of what Dan is. How did they end up together? You start to see that differently in season 2. You start to see the real Deb show. Not that she's completely bad. I don't think a lot of the main characters are not completely bad. There are characters that I do think are completely bad in this show. One that we're going to get to in a couple episodes here. But Deb's not one of them. But it's interesting to see things start to change, and I'm glad they didn't keep playing her that one side that we saw in season 1, and we actually got to see a little bit of more of what her and Dan, what they had going on together. This was the last episode, like I said, that you saw Haley's parents together, and especially in the high school years, and they end up hitting the road, buying an RV, getting the hell out of Tree Hill. What else do we have in this episode? Everybody keeps thinking that Haley's pregnant. Obviously, she's not. But, I'm not going to go into that. Yeah, it's a pretty once again, kind of it has the same vibe as the first episode, just the beginning of season 2 vibe. Like there's certain moments in the show that I look at and like I group them together, and this is definitely one of them. We start to see more of like side characters at this point, right? We're building more on Mouth. We started doing that towards the end of season 1. We definitely do it more in season 2, but we also see more of the River Court guys, like Skills and stuff, and we see them in this episode. Start trying to heal that relationship between Lucas, Brooke, and Peyton, and the fact that he left that letter and they burned it. That all comes to light in this episode. And then we get to episode 3 of season 2, Near Wild Heaven. This aired on October 5th, 2004. It was once again directed by Greg Prange. He directs a lot of episodes. I'm not really sure. I wonder too, a lot of times when I'm looking at these, for example, directors like Greg, did he choose which episodes he wanted to direct, or was he just assigned these episodes, right? Because if I'm him, I of course want to direct the openers of the season and the finales and whatnot, and the big episodes. But I don't know why he would have chose to direct episode 3. It's not a bad episode, but it's definitely not an episode I would have chosen to direct. This episode is written by James Patrick, I'm not the best at pronouncing names, Sturrocks, and Chad Fidish. They co-wrote the episode. They co-wrote 4 episodes together, including another episode in season 2, I believe. Anyways, they wrote a total of 4 episodes together. Not a badly written episode, but probably one of my least favorite episodes of season 3, or season 2. It's got some comedic moments in there that really work, but there's some other stuff in this episode that is just kind of like, really? Like this is a whole stripper angle on both sides, on the, the bachelorette party and the bachelor party. But the actual, like, the escort, stripper, whatever that Tim's brother hooks up with that ends up showing up and playing NBA Live with Nathan, that was kind of stupid. I wish they wouldn't have even put that in there. But the stuff with Tim in this episode was funny. I'm glad they put that in there and continued putting Tim and sprinkling him in every so often. I feel like, because, that was supposed to be Nathan's best friend, I guess, when the show started. So I didn't want them to just throw that character aside and not, touch on him anymore. And throughout the first 3 seasons, I feel like they do that a little bit. They sprinkle him in, but fade him out just enough that by in season 4, when he's gone, we don't really miss him anymore. And it's explained in season 4 where he went, So the next episode we're going to get to... we should talk about this too. In episode 3 is when we start to see that Brooke... the storyline with her family losing their money, that comes in episode 3, and plays a huge part in this season and in Brooke's storyline. And really, her character moving forward in the show, I feel like. The last episode I want to talk about here is the 4th episode of season 2, You Can't Always Get What You Want. This aired on October 12th, 2004. It was directed by Joanne Kearns, who only directed this one episode, and it was written by Jennifer Cecil and Karen Usher. Now, Jennifer Cecil, this was her 2nd episode that she wrote. She also wrote the 3rd episode of the series in season 1, and she continues to write one more episode after this. She wrote episode 13 of season 2, which is a pretty big episode and a really well-written episode. I'm curious to know why she didn't write any more of the episodes after that. It's also written by Karen Usher, who only wrote this episode. There's some really good moments in this episode. I really like the stuff with Lucas and Dan in the car, the race between Felix, Felix and, well, yeah, this is Felix's first episode. He's introduced in this episode, and that's the character I was talking about earlier when I said there's some characters in the series that are completely bad. And that includes some psychos that we see later on, and Felix, who is also he's just a creep. He's an awfully written character. I guess, I don't know. I wouldn't really blame these ladies for writing him. I wouldn't really blame whoever for writing him, because I guess there are people like that, but just the biggest douche. Probably one of my least favorite characters on the show. To me, there's just like no redeeming qualities about this guy. Or maybe that works. Maybe we needed a character like that on the show at this point that has no redeeming qualities, because that's what I love about Dan. That's what I love about some other characters on the show. No matter what they do, they're still grounded, and you can still understand why they do the things they do, and you can see the reasoning behind it. The emotion within them, what they're thinking. With Felix, it's just, man, this guy's an asshole. Don't really care for any of his interactions, like the whole stuff. The best thing part of this episode was him racing Lucas, because you got to see Lucas and Dan together doing that. By the way, the Corvette would have won, but whatever. You also get the stuff with Felix and Brooke that's set up in this episode and carries through the rest of the season. It's completely awful. I definitely think that was one of the worst things they did for Brooke's character. I know overall it builds on her character and I guess adds something to it moving forward in the show, but it's bad. But yeah, so that's Season 2, Episode 1 through 4. My next video will be touching upon Episode 5 through 8. And I'm going to try to do these where I'm doing 4 episodes at a time, so I don't get too far behind or cram too much in one video. But yeah, that's so far Season 2. Really just, so far the first 4 episodes is kind of laying what the tone of Season 2 is going to be, introducing these new characters, continuing things that were set up in Season 1, and then moving it into Season 2. And then laying groundwork for, big storylines that are going to continue throughout Season 2 and maybe even beyond, like Dan and Lucas, their relationship. We saw what has came before in Season 1 with them, but this season really puts them together for the first time, interacting, and that moving forward from that. And obviously that's a big part of this Season 2 is their relationship. Nathan and Haley's relationship, moving that forward, introducing these new characters, how that affects Brooke losing her money, Peyton, where she's at mentally, after she's, Jake's gone, her dad's not around, just stuff that just happened to her in Season 1. All of that. You also got the stuff, just Dan in general recovering from his heart attack, his relationship with Deb, their marriage that's still there. And then you got the stuff with Keith, feeling the guilt from what he did to Dan, but also now he's trying to run the dealership while Dan's getting better. A lot of stuff in here set up that we're going to continue seeing build throughout the course of the season.